Hi, hello everyone. Hey, we're really happy to see all of you here. I'm Arthur Steiner, and this is Leonardo Della Noggia. And as you know, we are the founders of Digital Earth, and we're really happy to have this course together with Mohammad Salemy and Moses Serubiri. And we're gonna really enjoy it to see the coming months, the results and the exercises during this great module. And I leave now the floor to Leonardo to introduce Mohammed and Moses.
Yes, indeed. Let's start with Moses. Moses is an independent writer and curator. His essays are published in Chimurenga, Kultur, oh Jesus, this is German, Kulturaustausch, I guess, and Contemporary and in Germany. His research and curatorial projects include Life in New City, a series of public programs with the Goethe Center in Kampala, and the Biennale Contemporary Art Festival, Cla Art and Mapped, among others. He has produced essays on African artists and curators for the online magazine Contemporary End. Serubiri is currently on the curatorial team of the 10th Berlin Biennale, actually just wrapped it up, for contemporary art curated by Gabi Nkombo. He has served as faculty and is an alumnus of the Aziko International Art School and was awarded the 2015 Stade Schreiber residency at the Beirut Academy of Advanced African Studies. Apologies again for my German pronunciation. And then it's time for Mohammad. Mohammad Salemy is an independent curator based in New York City, Vancouver, and Berlin. He's originally from Iran, and he has curated exhibition at the Coroner Gallery, the AMS Gallery, and the University of British Columbia, as well as the Satellite Gallery and Database. He co-curated Faces exhibition at the Maurice and Helen Belkin Art Gallery. In 2014, Salemy organized the Incredible Machines Conference in Vancouver. Salemy holds a master's degree in critical and curatorial studies from the University of British Columbia. And we will once again thank Mohammad for putting all of this together and the new center, everyone who is helping with making this happen. So we leave the floor to you guys, and we're gonna step out to allow one of the fellows to come in. Enjoy the course.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Moses, would you want to start? Because they've heard me speak 2 days ago in the beginning of the theory course, so it's good maybe to start with you. But I don't have a problem starting also because I have stuff ready to say. But just unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. I don't know if you saw my email. Did you see my email about bringing in networks and networks of production, etc.?
Maybe the best would be to just go over the content of it, just in case people didn't click on it, because this is really important. And as you and me have been discussing in the last few days, it overlaps with my approach. And it's also very useful for any kind of possible project that will come out of this seminar.
Yeah, so I basically wrote an email requesting.
Hello, I think
art.
Okay, you might want to repeat what you said because we lost you for 5 seconds. You said requesting.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about networks and production of art, and so production of contemporary art specifically. So I basically requested that you bring in any kind of networks that were somehow connected, either interpersonal networks or digital networks, or other networks that you're part of that have an impact on your practice currently. And the purpose is, I think, was that the research that I've done, or that's attached to the articles that I sent, is directly connected to, you know, forms of networking and also production of contemporary art in general, not just, you know, in a specific part of the world. I think if you think about some of these networks, they describe the art world actually quite well. So
there's a question on the sidebar. Asia's asking that, what do you mean by networks, and maybe especially the monetary aspect of it in particular. Now, I don't want to like explain your points because, as I said, we talked about this. It would be nice if you can explain to her that what do you mean by the monetary part, because actually to me that's one of the most important parts of it.
Yeah, I think, you know, networks, so I'm trained as a software engineer, and so for me, networks are very, very technical things. Networks have an architecture, and you can talk about various modes of how networks are sort of put together and how they're organized. But I'm also a curator, so I'm basically thinking also about the networks that function in the art world. Now, the monetary aspect of it is directly connected to your practice, because that's often a measure of how your practice is either perceived or how your practice is expanding. If you look at if there's any money involved in the networks that you have. But you could replace that with data, for example. I mean, if you write an application or if you're connected to a network in which an application is involved, that's also, I guess, a form of data. So in a way, I'm just trying to sort of think about how you can sort of organize your, yeah, does that make sense, Asia? Maybe you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't say. Well, not yet. I mean, maybe you could give an example, like a simple example of like this could be a network, and this could be a
network to you. What is a network to you?
I mean, I think my confusion came from like what would be the interpersonal and what would be the digital one, because when you wrote about networks, I immediately thought like of institutions that somehow supported my educational work, so that could be a network. But then I don't know, is it like, does it fall into interpersonal or what would be the digital?
That's also a network. Yeah, sure.
I think if I can jump in, I think the purpose of Moses, and I have a luxury, I have spoken to him in length about this, is to somehow abstract something out of all these three or other possible types of network to arrive at some definition of network that actually then can be then sent back to these concrete empirical examples and see if it works or not, right? So can we like deduct something and make an abstraction that then can be used, right? So in that sense, yeah, all those plus more, maybe even, you know, digital, institutional, interpersonal, right?
I mean, maybe since Asia is not maybe comfortable with the idea of the monetary or the kind of category that is either digital or interpersonal, is that somebody who sort of has digital interpersonal networks that, you know, they care to talk about?
Okay, so you know we can get into the discussion, but I think the fact is that Moses doesn't know you, and I mean I know some of you because of having the luxury of doing the last seminar, but I also see new faces that I don't know who didn't show up to the other seminar. So maybe while we all think about the question of networks, maybe we should start introducing ourselves. From my right, I will call your name, and if you can unmute yourself and say a few things about yourself and your practice, and maybe even a little bit further, if you feel like it, about your field of research or what you've been doing, to give us some idea. And for those of you who met in the last class, you guys hadn't met at all before, right? So it was a good chance to see face to face who are the residents of Digital Earth. And for those of you who knew, you did not meet anyone at all. So it's very useful if you do this. So let's start with Valia. And also, please tell us what city or what spot geographically you're joining us from, because it'll help us understand a different type of geographical network that's taking place right now with us being in this hangout. Okay, so go ahead, Valia. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Hey everyone. I'm an artist, mostly working with media, and very much interested in social psychology and how like technology and this social psychology technology, as I call it, works today, how it influences people's lives. I'm currently in Cologne in Germany, and yeah, and sometimes in Moscow. My research project that I proposed related to manipulative algorithms, manipulative interfaces, and connected to many different scientific areas where it was developed in recent years, like I don't know, user experience, like from digital fields like user experience design or dark patterns, or to the social psychology itself, or and I don't know, some urbanistic practices.
Thank you. Okay, what about, I'm going to move to Umber. You're on.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Umber, and I'm Umber Majid. I'm a visual artist based between Lahore, Pakistan, and New York. I'm currently in New York right now. I kind of gave an intro last time, but I basically use state and family archival material to speak about certain histories based in South Asia, but using South Asia as like a site to speak of like global issues. So I've worked with kind of investigating the nuclear history of Pakistan using speculative fiction, animation. But now for Digital Earth, I'll be working on a project related to my uncle's failed tourism business in Pakistan. That the company was dissolved in the early 2000s due to like the implications of the war on terror, and so I'm using his archival material to kind of fictionally revitalize the company, and picking a very specific site in Lahore to create a kind of like walking tour, an app with that. And it's an ancient Egyptian themed gated community on the outskirts of Lahore. So I'll be visiting Pakistan at some point during the fellowship to do more research. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we can, maybe we can move to Solvik. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Solveig. I'm based between Beijing and now Berlin, currently in Berlin. I guess I work also as a designer, where currently I'm working on more archivally, so more digital archives now related to ocean-related research. And I guess I'm also very interested, or have been publishing quite a lot around the ideas around aesthetic journalism, so more thinking about experimental documentary practices. My past work, I've been looking a lot at the New Silk Road, specifically around Xinjiang area. And I guess they're kind of looking at the infrastructure networks that kind of circulate both within the digital sphere of informal trading into the actual physical construction of the rail route and its disruptances with unexpected weather, such as increasing sandstorms in the area. But now I'm collaborating closely with Asia, and we're working on geocinema together, and we're thinking about planetary scale sensory networks, especially to do with climate modeling in the view of cinema. And so we'd be looking again a lot at a lot of these infrastructures of editing these models of the world, especially in light of the new Silk Road. So we're going to look at more the digital Belt and Road and other more sensory networks developed in Asia.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we're gonna go to Ming.
Hello, hello everyone. I'm Ming Xie. You can actually call me Min. And I actually work with Pete, but he's on the way home, so he's not here currently. But yeah, maybe I can just introduce both of us. We actually formed an art duo called Hyperbation. We formerly worked and studied in London. Both of us have got an architectural background. I also used to be an architect. I used to work in architectural practice in Manchester, in London, and also in Shanghai. So, but currently I'm now in Sichuan, China, and Pete is actually in Beijing. So maybe so we could meet Pete recently. But both of us will travel to Dunhuang, which is actually on the Silk Road in China, and we will. For the Digital Earth project, we actually start from the cultural background of the Silk Road in China as the foundation for our work. But actually, what we used to do is what we call multi-reality experience. We basically we use virtual reality, augmented reality, or mixed reality technologies to create the virtual exhibition or virtual sculpture. We like one of our recent work in Japan. We created we used basically we created some kind of like a VR game, but also combined with the local culture, local history. And one of our working methods I would like to mention is that we use these three words: remix, recreate, and rediscover. So basically, we firstly digitalize the physical world of physical artifacts we found, and then we transform it into the virtual world, like a game or sometimes an application, a phone app, or just a three-dimensional website. And then we remix the digitalized artifacts inside of the virtual world and use the computer programs, and we recreate a new kind of reality based on that. So for the project for Digital this time, we would like to come back to our Chinese background, Chinese culture, to actually remix it for the as a contemporary art, in the form of the mixed reality experience. And I can actually say something about the network because I actually prepared some answer for that.
I would say let's hold on to it. Let's go through that and hold on to it. And we're very interested to hear that, right? But just hold on a minute.
No problem. No problem. Yeah.
Jessica, it will be your turn.
Okay. Yeah.
Please unmute yourself. Don't worry, it's the first session, and you get used to the format. Hello.
Hi. So I'm Jessica Khazrik. I'm an artist and a writer, and I also in my practice, I'm very much my practice is very much centered around the relationship between the production of space, the production of knowledge and media and language. So in a way, thinking of how the organization of knowledge, how epistemology itself affects space, but also thinking of language as a promise or language as a false witness. So I've been
as a false what? Sorry,
false witness.
False witness.
Yes. So I work in different settings. I work alone. I also collaborate often, and I work sometimes under different names. In the past 2-3 years, I've been organizing different interventions, not only happening in the art world, under the name of the Society of False Witnesses, as well as keeping this name open so other people who are not affiliated with me have used the name. I'm very much interested in looking into like the global economy from the lens of first like the trade of waste, thinking of them as like exiled and denied matter that are pushed outside of space, but also outside of taxonomies. And I've been doing this since 2013 through different projects in Lebanon, but also starting from Lebanon mainly to look into more of global relations. And lately I've been finding a lot of similar, more of like economical roots between the trade of toxic waste and surveillance products. So this is also where the network becomes very much visible, because while also looking into different issues related to the living environment, from like, for instance, like the economical traits of toxic waste to the like the maps of underground water channels, the groundwater. For me, it became more and more with time very much visible how much in technology we, as if always, have this desire to simulate the living environment in one way or another. While I'm also very much interested in the predominant tendency that we have today towards, let's say, AI agents like algorithms or neural networks, how there's a lot of legal work today around giving them, for instance, legal personhood, rather than thinking of how these technological protocols in a way simulate certain spatial and political relations. So besides this, I also my practice is very much centered around sound and language. So I've been in the past year and a half working on the technopolitics of the voice today, from looking at it as an impossible biometric. So I work with machine learning and also a lot with vocoding and vocal synthesis. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeremiah, you want to like reiterate your introduction from last session?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm from Lagos in Nigeria, and my work is centered around performance and new media. And I've been trying to, since I started working alone, because I used to work in a collective, I've been trying to include interactivity into all the projects that I make. So I work mainly in photography and video, along with performance. And I started juxtaposing old city photos, archival photos with newer ones that I make as a beginning. This was the first interactive project that I make. It was basic juxtaposing, and from then on, I tried to experiment more with the things that I make, just to bring in the audience into the artwork, to find a way to always get the audience involved one way or another. And at the moment, I'm looking at creating a project around data on the new deep sea port that's to be built in Lagos. It's a free trade zone, and it's going to be a free port. And my work is centered around visualization of data from the proposed project and from the available data that's around, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go.
Halima, do you want to take over?
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry, the light's a little uncoordinated on my end, and I'm sorry for coming in late in today. I am just coming out of the Center for Research Architecture here at Goldsmiths, and for the master's, I was doing a project on the Lekki Freeport, actually, and also on Eco Atlantic in Lagos State in Nigeria. And I was using Nigerian video films, especially those that had a connection to occult and Pentecostal Christian practices. So I was thinking about them or doing a rereading of them, especially connected to the mediatic. So that would kind of be a practice of visual archaeology, where I was trying to read into the rituals and the practices of the characters in the video films and also in promotional videos. And for Digital Earth, my project will be centered again on taking this forward, but also thinking about how that applies to offshore drilling practices off the Niger Delta in Nigeria, and thinking about the ritual practices of Mamiwata tribes and followers there, and how they connect to the consummation, I guess, of infrastructure and technology off that coast, essentially. So yeah, I should also say I am based in Lagos and in Abuja in Nigeria, but right now I'm speaking to you from London, actually. So
Are you in the first year of the master's or the second?
oh, it's I've actually finished, so I just did it 1 year. I've just finished, and I'm just in the process of flying back to Lagos to begin fieldwork on the Digital Earth project.
Lovely. One of our graduating certificate students just started in your program. Manuel Correa. He's a great filmmaker from Colombia.
Oh, really? Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, he made a movie actually that I'm going to bring into one of the seminar sessions and make people watch it, called Art Offline, which has to do with like the transformation of art and artistic practice under the conditions of internet and sort of like connectivity and networks.
That's interesting.
Thank you. Okay, Francois, maybe you can take over.
Hi there. My connection is not very good. It seems to be cutting in and out.
Pretty good.
Is it right?
Yeah, okay. Good right now.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, yeah, that's where I'm based as an artist. I'm work predominantly in performance and film and new media. I work a lot with waste and with supply chains and kind of retracing supply chains and looking at various histories through the retracing of certain systems. The work that I'm sort of thinking of or the work that I'm busy with for Digital Earth started earlier this year already. It's a project that kind of looks at e-waste in Africa and or how Africa fits into the global tech trade, both as a space of mining and of dumping, and trying to kind of connect certain dots around the world. And I'm planning on going to China later in the year, and possibly America as well, and doing various performance interventions in these spaces. Looking at yeah, so in these spaces I'm looking at various histories and myths and things as well. A lot of my performance happens in public space. I create sculptural costumes and then either perform them myself or film others, actors and dancers performing in them. Yeah, that's a little intro.
Okay, Dilman, you want to like take over, and you're still mute, sir. If you can unmute yourself, that would be lovely. It's up on the screen there, on the microphone. You want to click on it and unmute. There we go. Oh, it went away again.
I do.
There?
Yes, go ahead. It's good.
Okay. Yeah, so it's basically we are introducing ourselves?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So I'm Dilam from Uganda. Most of my work, I actually work in many disciplines, and I write, I make films, and I do, for the last 1 or so years, I've been doing a lot of digital artworks. So I'm always working on projects that have a bit of social context, and I always, the genre I like working on most is science fiction. So the thing that I'm doing with Digital Earth concerns a project that is being piloted in Uganda with where they want to introduce genetically modified mosquitoes to combat malaria. So I think I'm going to be producing a film that will try to answer questions around the use of this technology, especially in communities that are currently vulnerable to, you know, Western powers, to NGOs, and to stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's 2 more people, Asia, and then we go at last to Tabita. Go ahead, Asia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Asia. I'm currently speaking from Ukraine, but for the past few years I've been more of a nomad, and I lived in Berlin, Moscow, New York, and other places as well. My background, most of my 20s I worked as a journalist in arts in Ukraine, and focusing more on this transitional period that Ukraine is now in, like after the collapse of the USSR. And then the recent revolution was a turning point for me, because I was largely part of this process, and this is when I became more and more interested in critical geography. And right after the revolution, I was lucky to get a Fulbright scholarship. So I relocated to New York, where I studied the history of art and architecture. And I also worked as research assistant at Storefront for art and architecture. So basically, I never had my own artistic practice or anything like that. I'm new to this whole crowd. While at Strelka Institute, where I was after New York, I met Solveig, and this is where we developed this method, geocinema, and this is what we're going to focus on throughout the Digital Earth Fellowship. We will go to China, where we are going to make a research on Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you. Okay, Tabita, do you want to take over? Okay, maybe Tabita's not working the microphone, because she also sent an email saying, look, she'll be traveling from.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, actually we can. Go ahead. Okay, maybe Tabita's not working the microphone, because she also sent an email saying, look, she'll be traveling from.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, actually we can. Go ahead.
Okay, hi.
Hi. Hi, yes, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So, oh my God.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my work or like practices are about decolonial healing, but I guess on a different field, like historical healing, political, technological, spiritual, like emotional, and I'm mainly interested in the spaces where technology and spirituality connect, where they intersect and how they are in conversations. Mostly through looking at ICT, information and communication technology. So I'm interested in knowing how we connect to each other, to ourselves, to the earth or the universe, and through which technologies. So electronic technologies like the internet, or organic technologies through communication with like plants or water or different interfaces, or spiritual technologies like communication with ancestors, and how all these ICT are portals, let's say, to different types of informations. Yeah, and for Digital Earth, I'm gonna look at vestige or the end of conversation between humanity and the sky. So I'm looking at like the old celestial technologies, or not necessarily old, but like unfunctional or residue, relics technologies. What's left after they've been operated. So looking at stone circles. So it's like megalith in circle planted. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like large stone erected in a circle. And you have some all over the world, all over, like from the Americas, throughout the African continent, in Europe, in Asia. And so I'm now in Senegal, in Dakar, and there's loads of like stone circles in the Senegambian region. So I'm gonna go there, do some research, and in parallel looking at spaceways, so all the layer of unfunctional satellites that orbit around Earth. So yeah, kind of looking at this. Yep.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Mo, do you want to go, or should I go?
No, you can go, but I just want to say something about the delay that was happening with Tabita. Yeah. I think I'll put. No, you can go, but I just want to say something about the delay that was happening. See, that's the thing. I think if I don't mute Tabita, we're gonna have this delay constantly. So Tabita, unfortunately, I'm actually like everybody else in the seminar. You're gonna be muted until you want to speak, right? And then constantly. Oh my God. So Tabita, unfortunately, please don't unmute yourself, because if you keep unmuting yourself, it's going to be really hard to maintain the seminar, because you have a really huge delay in your system, right? So we're gonna keep you muted. If you want to speak, either let us know so we go quiet for like a few seconds, and then you can come on. Otherwise, we're just gonna have this like ghost from the past hanging around whenever you unmute yourself. It's kind of interesting, but it's also like, it's interesting when we're live, but I think for people who watch these archival videos, it could be a little bit like, a little bit confusing of what's going on, why like things are echoed like such a long time afterwards. Anyways, so I'll keep you muted. So yeah, okay, Moses, you can unmute and take over.
Yeah, okay, so hi, I'm Moses.
Just want to say that Ming is also waiting to comment on networks. Let's not forget that, because we cut him off. So
yeah, definitely. So I'm like I said, I'm a writer, and I'm here to talk about networks and production in contemporary art, or production of contemporary art. basically, one of the sort of most basic ideas that sort of has come across in my research is that the mobile phone has somehow become a quite interesting device in relation to how research is organized, or how research was organized, say in the 70s and times before that. And so curators who are doing research, you know, now, or even say in the 90s, had access to mobile phones and fax machines, etc. And so they had they could connect easier, basically, you know, with artists and, you know, and various kinds of institutions that that are not part of their geographical location, you know. And so one of the things that—
Sorry, did you say they could connect easier in the past than now?
No, I'm saying that they couldn't connect.
Okay.
They did not connect as well as they do now, especially after the advent of, you know, the fax machine and the mobile phone and etc. One of the challenges I think I've been looking at in my research was how curatorial research kind of meets a very strongly developmental context. I don't know if you understand about how curatorial practice is developmental, or the relationship between development and curatorial practice. Is this somehow
Maybe it
clear?
would be a good idea to just give us a little brief introduction, because actually I'm kind of interested to see what you have to say about it.
Well, it's fascinating because curatorial practice, in a way, exhibition making, etc., has been very much about developing some kind of system or language in which artists could be presented, and sometimes that involves strengthening already existing, you know, networks, already existing systems, you know, or it involves creating rather new systems. Curatorial practice is not entirely independent from existing networks, particularly those that are infrastructural. So you have a very strongly kind of synchronized back and forth between how curators work and how developmental kind of infrastructure, you know, works. So I'm talking about funding specifically, you know, organizations that give money for the production of culture, for the production of cities, for the production of education, etc., are very strongly sort of in conversation with curatorial networks and curatorial strategies, curatorial processes. Either way, in way curatorial practice has, in the way artistic methods have developed, or contemporary art has proceeded in the last, say, again, since the advent of the mobile phone, or just before that, or even the fax machine, is is really in parallel almost with the way curators could strongly, you know, kind of synchronize these two places. You know, they kind of could bring together more money into or create situations where the language of artists, or the work that artists were producing, could be more visible to you know, institutions that, or developmental how do you call them, developmental sources, basically, or developmental kind of frameworks, or developmental yeah, developmental. I mean, and also what I'm talking about is also in a way related to how contemporary art is not an individualistic pursuit in a way. I mean, I think sometimes we sort of look at artists working and we think, oh yeah, you know, they're kind of off on, you know, by themselves, etc. You know, there's this kind of mythology about the artist being a recluse and somebody who is a hermit, you know, isolated from the world. I don't know if this is something that any of you believe or something that any of you sort of practice, but I think actually it's the contrary. You know, artists have been, you know, tasked with, they've been described as ambassadors. I remember in the 60s what contemporary art, I don't remember, but I've read about, because I wasn't there in the 60s, I've read about how conceptual artists in the 60s became, you know, ambassadors for the United States, or they could kind of travel around the world, you know, in ways that, you know, not even their, you know, professional politicians could. And so what, all that to say that, you know, the kind of development of contemporary art has been very strongly mediated by forces of networking, technology, forces that made it possible for art to be seen at a quite global level. So that's a very brief kind of mode to describe the kind of relationship between development and contemporary art. Other ways is very, very, you know, more obvious, you know, when you think about how institutions or how projects, the idea of a project itself. I don't know, I think there's an essay recently, I think Boris Groy says, somebody wrote an essay about the project, what the project is. But the project, the idea of a project itself is something that comes out of developmental philosophy or developmental and developmental thinking and strategies. So these are fundamentally, I think, regarded as, you know, obviously we don't remember that in the early 20th century, people didn't really talk about doing projects, you know, artists or even sometimes governments or art schools or even business persons. I don't think they really talked about what they were doing as doing projects. But, you know, at some point, I think it's really after the Second World War, when you have a kind of cybernetic framework, that the advent of the project sort of emerges. So most of you actually describe what you're doing as doing projects, but that actually, that shift that took place in the advent of cybernetics also has something to do with the development of more sophisticated technologies, but also a changing form of economy that, or not economy, a changing form of relationship between various places and various countries that necessitated more trajectories, more trajectories and more trajectorial sort of approaches. So in a sense, with more travel, more, you know, more exciting technologies, more exciting ways for people to move across the world, etc., etc., and the same ways that many of you are planning to do or are already currently doing, more trajectories were developed, you know, basically more approaches to developing projects were developed, you know. And so one of the ways that actually, one of the problems that emerges in some of my research is that, you know, not only is curatorial, well, one of the problems that emerges is that very often you find that not, you know, the people who have access to contemporary art are not those people often who, well, are people who have, in a sense, created projects or have created developmental frameworks in which they could you know, create trajectories and enter into direct dialogue with those, so such that data could be sort of exchanged. You know, they've created these pathways somehow. And so some of these people were collectors, actually. They were not curators. You have collectors who actually created massive projects where they were, you know, sending out advisors and sending out all these people around, you know, the world in various cities to actually look for, you know, artists, but also not just that, to set up workshops, to give artists, you know, technological and information access, to, you know, to set up some kind of pathways between what they were doing, say somewhere in London or in New York and other places, or in St. Petersburg, with what the artists were doing in Cuba, etc. And so you have these very strange kind of things happening where, you know, cybernetics, and I think it's also really that airplane travel was also a very strong part of, say, the contemporary art, you know, framework. You know, conceptual artists in the 1960s basically, you know, could travel on the airplane, and in the 60s you didn't have to pay more money if you were traveling across the same route. Basically, if you flew to say if you flew to I don't know, Amsterdam, and you were coming from New York, you only had to pay for a flight to Amsterdam, and then you could stop in London, and you could stop in another place just before you get back to New York. And you could stop for as long as you, well, you could stop for as long as you want, obviously, but your flight wouldn't be, you would not pay more money, basically, as long as it was on the way back, you know, on the route back. So you're thinking about a trajectory of sorts, you know, how the airline, you know, kind of established this trajectory where, you know, it made easy access between points on the trajectory itself. This also goes very much in relation to software technologies. I don't know if necessarily software technologies, but the way we understand modular technologies today as being detachable is also similar to the way contemporary artists in the 1960s thought about process, you know, in a way. They thought about their work as being process-driven. So if you think of that trajectory of the plane that's going across to, like, that furthest point, you have coming back like that. You have almost processes that are collective, you know, accumulated processes, as opposed to say one finished kind of product. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense to you, but
it totally does. I mean, actually resonates so much with what I will be bringing and stuff. So go ahead, continue.
Okay. So the interesting thing, I mean, I'm also trying to look at your sorry, I have a lot of noise coming from the window, but if I'm trying to think about your different projects and your different, you know, somebody's talking about the I think it was Jessica talking about, somebody was talking about global economies from the perspective of waste, and then someone was talking about this kind of offshore, I don't know if offshore drilling practices in
well, the
Nigeria.
waste was definitely Jessica, and offshore practices was Francois. If I'm not wrong.
Offshore practices was Halima.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, this is interesting. The projects are so much like overlapping in so many different ways. But Jessica was talking about the distribution of waste, because I'm sure it has something to do with the garbage crisis in Lebanon. Maybe I'm just generalizing, but like having gone there, and no, it doesn't, right? Well, we get into it somehow. Okay. And then Halima was talking about that. You're right. But so was Francois, I thought, was referring to it. But I could be wrong.
Yes. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think actually Halima was talking about global economy from the space of waste. And then somebody else talked about waste. I think it was someone in Cape Town. They talked about waste and supply chains. Then we were talking about film and cinema in Nigeria. We talked about the Silk Road. I very much like this kind of like combination of people talking about the Silk Road at the same time. And then it kind of emerged in different ways of different sort of infrastructural ways, talking about sensory and planetary scales. And so some of these kind of conversations are actually very central to, not central, I mean, they remind me of just the phenomenon of contemporary art itself, you know, and they remind me of how contemporary art developed as this thing that's kind of trying to think at a planetary, not necessarily planetary scale, but trying to think in a kind of networking mode, but also quite modularly, you know, and process-like, as opposed to, you know, unitary, isolatory, or even, you know, this kind of myth or the trope that the artist is a hermit, something that comes probably, I don't know, from before modernity or even just in early modernity. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I could just kind of elaborate a little bit, or maybe think through some of the kind of networks that you are talking about, or maybe Ming, you want to sort of introduce the answer to the question that I gave.
Before we open it up to the residents, I think maybe I just want to like put a frame around your what you introduced, because I think it's maybe a little bit too sort of like too abrupt to sort of like, you basically, it's like blue pilling everyone. If I'm using the red and blue pill in a matrix's right context, it's like basically like peeling a major layer off and saying like, well, this is really what the mechanism that undergirds most of you people's a way of working and connecting and sort of like hoping to like achieve in the future, right? So it sort of has this sort of like and I don't know how many of our residents have actually like consciously have thought about this sort of like, because we take these things for granted.
Yeah.
We take these networks and networks of institutions, friends, people we meet personally, people we meet through work, and all sorts of like networks of information that enters our work and leaves our work for granted these days, right? Yeah. And then and when you take something for granted, you bracket it out, and once you bracket it out to be able to like achieve other stuff, right? But then after a while you forget. So I really love how you kind of like put the spotlight back on what we all have learned in the last, at least since 2012, 13, when mobile phones became kind of like predominant, and when our practice moved into this new stage, you putting the spotlight right back onto it, right? And saying like, let's discuss this and maybe get a bit into its history and analyze it, and not necessarily like critique it, like, but of course it involves critiques. So yeah, so you know, I
mean, I have to actually say to you that I listened to Voti, I think it was Hans Ulrich Obrist and like Susan Hapgood, the, you know, curators. I don't know if you guys are familiar with these names, but they're, you know, curators. They were talking about this thing called Voti that they created in the 90s, and it was a network of curators. And they did this book recently that was basically published by Salt in I think Istanbul, and basically the Voti was just an email mailing list that, you know, where curators would go in there and be like, hey, you know, this show opened, I saw this and this and this and this and this and that, I saw this artist here, here and there, and then I don't understand what this and this and this means here and blah, blah, blah. It was a way of really almost like in that 90s moment of, shall I say, just after multiculturalism, the cultural wars, but just kind of like within that milieu of like more international artists joining the art world, and these curators visiting, you know, the biennials and places, you know, that are outside of, you know, Europe. They were actually, you know, sending each other on a mailing list. That's also how Iflux started. On a mailing list. But recently they published a book that was trying to capture their conversations, and one of the things that they talked about, Susan Hapgood talked about, is that because she was the how do you call, you know, you have like a website manager or a website
administrator.
Well, administrator, you have a database manager, website administrator. She was working in that capacity on the mailing list, and so she said one of the most significant things was when Thelma Golden was fired from the new museum in New York after I think she curated a show called Blackmail in '94. I don't know. She was fired, I think, in '98. Thereabouts. I'm not so sure exactly what precipitated it now, but these curators just emailed each other on that mailing list, and then they decided to come up with a way. Well, they decided to send a fax to the director of the Whitney Museum, and they were faxing the machine all day. You know, they basically just sent faxes like the whole day. The machine wouldn't stop, you know, printing these faxes from all these curators. And somehow, when you think about it, it sounds like, well, you know, it sounds a bit, you know, maybe cliche or maybe, you know, unnecessary, but it was basically extremely it wasn't, first of all, when you think about it, it wasn't possible to find out that news too soon without the mailing list that they had on email. And then secondly, the fact that they then decided to respond through, you know, communication, well, using the fax machine was actually really great, because they didn't, you know, they didn't go out and hold signs and protest or whatever. They just sent faxes, and it was like, you know, just faxes coming out. And because of that, they created a really well, they gave him a very frustrating situation, the director of the Whitney Museum at that time. But my point generally is that how is it that curators have somehow taken advantage, a very, very big advantage of, you know, the advent of things like email, mobile phones, you know, and fax, and have been very, very like crucial to their sort of processes somehow. And I think without those things, actually, Voti wouldn't have, or maybe those curators may have continued to be isolated from, you know, practices, you know, in Africa. You know, you had I think one of the only curators on that website who was from Africa was Okwin Wezor. I think there was one other person, but I don't know who else was on there. And also just, you know, sharing kind of, you know, these are the artists that I'm thinking about, these are the artists that I'm thinking about, in a way that was quite open-spirited and open, you know, and generative. And so, yeah, I was responding to you more about that. We sort of take it for granted that these things have been there the whole time, and also we take it for granted that this is how we work, and therefore, you know, it's normal. You know, like it's normal. Like we just kind of think, but actually, no, it's not normal. Because it actually is part of the development of practice itself, you know, like these networks have been central to the making of the understanding of the kind of the trajectories that have shaped international practice. And just the idea that contemporary art is an international phenomenon owes
internationality to,
yeah, it's owed to it's owed to technology. It's actually owed to something. It's not just like, oh, its own thing. No, it's really attached to something. And the other thing I want to say is that I wanted to really think about the data that you are actually working with, because that's a very crucial part. One of the interesting things, the reason why such advanced technology developed so rapidly in the 60s and 50s, actually, as well as in the 40s, was because all these different countries were trying to compete with one another to decode or to establish what kind of information was being shared. So you have like satellite networks that were developed not that long after, radio kind of networks that, you have this kind of people trying to decode or find different frequencies of the radio and trying to decode what is being talked about there. So the question of data and like the particularly the security of data and became a concern, several different times, I think over that time, and also became like a cause for scandal, actually. But more than that, I want us to really think about what kind of data we're sharing and whether or not we have control over that data, whether or not that data is privy to somebody and it's, there's some kind of, what are the conditions in which data is transmitted, basically? When you think about networking and the networks that you're part of global, international, local, regional, even in your own community or in your own neighborhood, you're part of some kind of network. But what kind of data is actually moving across, and how do you have any rules about, what that data is and how it's sort of shared across these networks?
Okay, should we go to Ming?
Yeah.
Okay. I pretty much actually agree with Moses' idea. Well, I'm relatively very new and young to the contemporary art world, but what I actually learned from the current information technology and basically the use of the social media, Facebook, Instagram, and I pretty much found out that about, for example, about the mailing list you are talking about. From my personal experience now, all these creators, they are now all sharing this kind of exhibitions or artists they interested on the Facebook. Yeah. And yeah, well, I think that's probably another form of the mailing list now. It's the timeline of the Facebook, basically, and also because of the, I think also because of these social platforms actually allows us the contemporary artists somehow becomes the digital nomad, I would say, and because for example, I take my own experience. We usually found out open call online is It can be in UK, in London. It can be in Japan. It can be in China, anywhere of the world. And we answer the open call just online, and then we got the sometimes we got the chance. So we flew to the new country and to the site, to the outer residency basically, and then we work locally, and then we got involved into the local other local art organizations, and then we got get in touch with the local people, local curators, face to face, and sometimes and most of the time they will also share our exhibition, our work on their social platform, and so it's a kind of, I would say, it's a hyperlocal process. Sometimes maybe we start from online and becomes and then we organize a local exhibition, and then we got the connections from the local area, and then when they share the event, they share the connections, it becomes maybe a global connections again.
Yes.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. Yeah, and somehow it makes us all like a digital nomad, and actually that's how currently we are. Peter and I are actually practicing through this method, and yeah, I would say that the Digital Earth is actually another example of this. Yeah, I think that yeah, that's what I think about this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's a very strong. I mean, I think, you know, the open call is a very interesting method also, but it reminds me of the you know, the very how should I say, the very way in which kind of like mailing lists kind of are operating, or the way in which should I say even magazines were operating. I mean, I think even before mailing lists in the 90s, I think magazines were the places that you saw information about and a kind of call for artists, a call for exhibitions. And I think before, you know, I mean, now you have to send them through the internet, but I think before you sent your work, or you sent copies and facsimiles of your kind of processes and maps and your models and etc. through the mail, like snail mail, and then you supposedly heard back after, you know, a couple of weeks or even a month or two about whether you were selected for something. I don't know if I mean, I find it really hard now to understand whether artists always traveled to the destination, to the local destination. I find it really hard to discern whether it was always something that artists did, but I think that definitely if they had a communication and they also then submitted their work, you know, to, I don't know, probably through a courier service, or yeah, through the mail. And I think you know, when you think about how contemporary art has been shaped by practices that such as, you know, Lucy Lippard's kind of work that involved doing exhibitions where artists just created a postcard, and the postcard was the thing that was shown in the exhibition, and you know, that exhibition could travel, just put it in a suitcase and send it to the next location on a plane, and then they open the suitcase and boom, there's the exhibition, and then put it up, and then again more artists would add postcards, and I think about how that actually was an interesting model to help us, you know, think through the mobility of contemporary art. I think also the point that you're making, Ming, is also about this mobility between local and international, local and global in a way. It certainly reminds me, I mean, Mo, I think you probably are more familiar with this, but it does remind me of the debates, you know, that Homi Bhabha was sort of part of in the very early 90s, that were trying to understand, you know, these connections between local and global, and the very, very sort of like tense conversations that were taking place. I don't know, I probably could find it. Mo, are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
No, but I have a different example that actually is being revived right now for a possible show in Berlin. It's like this Michael Morris and Vincent Tersov's image bank from the 1960s and 70s, in which even actually they thought about it in the 60s, but they only started actually doing it in the 70s. So the records are from 72, 73, 74.
Yeah.
And this is sort of like their own words about it, right? Access and intimacy, privacy and open information, business, economics, communication, politics, creativity, parts of our immediate and collective image bank. Research and communication carried on by artists recognizing each other as part of a network should be interpreted not only as collaborative work, but individual creativity responding to overlapping formats. Image bank is a vehicle from which research of this nature may evolve, right? So
yeah,
for 10 years, artists were involved with this, which was actually, it was called International Exchange Directory, right? And it was basically an accumulation of requests. If you needed someone's address, if you wanted an image, and then this service will seek out and then document it and send a copy to the person who requested it, right? And then the archive now is held at the University of British Columbia, where I did my MA in curatorial studies. And my supervisor and those people are in a conversation about maybe showing some of this in the upcoming year in Kunstwerks in Berlin. So yeah, so these practices were like, yeah, I'm from one of those, and I know these people. I mean, I know Michael Morris, I know Vincent Tersov, and they're very excited about it. You know, it was actually like part of the File magazine. You know, like A.A. Bronson was not an organizing part, but he was a contributor to the image bank, you know. And you said magazines, right? So File magazine was very much involved with this, the production of this image bank.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't just images. He was like, well, I'm looking for somebody's address. Do you know, I want to reach this artist. Do you know the address? And then somebody will like find it and then send it back. And then they even started to like incorporate fax machines into it when fax became available. But most of this was just like postcard and send it. And you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very, very good example. Also, it's a very intense, I think, interaction, right? Like, because you have this idea of people just sharing their contacts, right? Like, one of the scariest things that I think about is that these, like, a lot of artists use the phone. Like, the artists created work that was about, you know, your landline at home sometimes, you know, and sometimes your own sort of telephone was a part of a specific work that you produced. It's like the equivalent of like Hito Sterl putting her email on, you know, a video, you know, like a video work that you're going to see of hers, either like on the internet, on the actual internet, or in an exhibition, and that, you know, she's inviting you to write her an email about, you know, something that is of interest to her or something that's of interest to you. I think it's interesting because maybe what the image bank or the International Exchange Directory shows me is that the networks were much more freer, maybe, or there was somehow less measures involved as to like, okay, what were the limits of these networks and the data that was being shared across the networks, you know. Because we're kind of like thinking about people sharing their home address on the network, people sharing their contact on the network, people sharing I mean, of course, now we have the fact that email, I think, is something that's hard to well, email has gone through a whole I think evolution as well, a whole process of development. But I think if you think of email, the development of email in relation to the development of contemporary art, you can definitely see how once artists used to be so comfortable with putting their phone in in a show, in a gallery show or something, as part of their work. But and you're thinking about how perhaps the mailing list itself, as a framework for producing contemporary art, becomes much more controlled. Something that's much more limited to a specific group of people. You can join a mailing list, but you have to request, and then there's like a whole process of you. Sorry, I think my computer is going through a couple of challenges, but let me just correct them, and then I'll be back.
Oh, interesting. Like the sound is like the sound was behind the image. Now to maybe, oh, interesting. Like the sound was behind the image. Moses, it might also help if you leave the Hangout and come back. Maybe it's correct now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry, Jeremiah, you were saying you didn't get the last 2 minutes. No, so before I left, I was actually talking about the evolution of email technology. And I was talking about how the evolution of email can be seen in relation to the evolution of contemporary art. And of course, one of the great inventions within email technology is the mailing list. And the mailing list is actually a software technology that grants an administrator the right to invite or remove anyone from a mailing list. You can always request to be added to a mailing list, or you can request to be removed. And we can see this also with then how mailing list and mailing list technology becomes monetized and etc. It evolves into something more elaborate. Right now we have eFlux, for example, which did start as a mailing list. I don't know if you're familiar with eFlux, but eFlux started as a mailing list, and it's basically a directory where you can share, you can share events about information, press releases, mostly to a wide range of art world people. Art world contacts, basically. And it became this very strongly, people signing on to the eFlux sort of mailing list, and then it became a quite big phenomenon later on, to the point that now they, each sort of press release, or each sort of, announcement, they call
if you want to put it in eFlux own terminology.
They call it an announcement. Yeah, each announcement actually has a very specific monetary value, now, that it didn't have in the 90s or in the, I mean, eFlux did not, the mailing list didn't start in the 90s, but I mean, it didn't have at the beginning, So you have ways in which, I guess, a kind of control goes into how data is sort of shared.
Well, that aspect of eFlux is actually is interesting to talk about it in terms of how there's two different ways of calling it. One is You can call it monetization of communication.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what Eflux went through was like communication turned into advertising, like how communication becomes marketing. Whereas in the early days, it was just merely communication, right? Between art professionals, they would share their information about upcoming exhibitions, right? And then that slowly transformed into a very successful art. I mean, it's a niche success. We're not talking about success of millions and millions of dollars of, say, big advertising companies, but in a niche of art world and contemporary art, Eflux became a very successful advertising. I mean, one of its kind. We don't have any second because art world is too small. You can't have a second Eflux, right? Because it already does this, right? But they actually became a advertising company, like a successful advertising company. And this was sort of like a work of three artists.
But how does it become an advertising company? Because let's think about it for a moment. Advertising, Mo, you've disappeared, but I don't know.
I'm here.
Am I presenting?
Yes, you are presenting.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys are following, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as soon as I'm done or as soon as we, at any point you want to speak up. But there's two different things going on with Eflux, I feel. One of them has to do directly with contemporary art and the development of the technology, communication technology in relation to contemporary art, which is something that is not exclusively to the new millennium, So you have something that goes all the way back, I think, to the beginning of contemporary art, and something that is very much artists fully understanding that it is, we can do exhibitions through the mail. Mo, does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. You gave an example of it.
Yeah. And so in a way, Eflux actually is taking on that same idea
and literalizing it.
And literalizing it and actually saying, okay, not only can you do an exhibition through the mail, you can get people to pay for doing exhibitions.
I hope people here understand what is Moses's point. Is like basically it's about sort of like the extreme extension of the idea of like if a tree falls in the forest, anybody here, right? It's like if you have an exhibition somewhere and if you don't have an Eflux announcement for it, that exhibition in a context of international contemporary art might as well, it didn't even happen. So for it to register on the surface of what we call contemporary art, having a physical space and having that exhibition over there is just the first part. The exhibition actually actualizes in the last instance through this email that Eflux sends. And it, in a way, it's almost as important as the exhibition, if not more important, or at least that's the impression, or at least that's the impression that convinces people to pay on a sliding scale, whatever the price point for their institution is, pay for it because they understand that this is another exhibition, or this is just like the extension of that exhibition, or actually it is the exhibition. The Eflux mailing list is the exhibition, right? So this is sort of like what is Moses's assumption is based on. Go ahead.
So yeah. I mean, I wonder what your because we're at 11:30 now. I wonder what your thoughts are, and Mo also. Well, I wonder what. Maybe we could have like a 10 minutes discussion, and then Mo, you could,
I think people are like anyone who would like to participate, just unmute yourself and join the conversation, and then I will have some insights. The two exhibition essays that I produced just recently, and I send you copies of, has a lot of like relation to what Moses is talking about, especially in terms of like like you can extend Moses's logic and say these technologies actually are like the research-based practice owes its sort of like significance to these technologies because it couldn't even claim that we do research if these technologies weren't there to aid us to research, right? And the other thing that under the volcano paper I write about is that, and this is something that talked about before by other people, but like I just give it other sort of like sharp terminology, is that art arises from the culture and then kind of like arises from the culture. So essentially it's as a form of negating culture, right? Negating the dominant culture. Art kind of like stands up to it. I mean, of course, it's a very avant-garde view of art, right? And then through institutionalization, through exhibition, through like getting in the catalogs and curators writing about you and institutions accepting you, you return back to culture and you become culture again. And these technologies, and actually the life of contemporary art, if you see, is basically about the shortening of the space in which something is art and something becomes culture. Whereas today, almost it's an instantaneous that art becomes culture because it's immediately transmitted, it's immediately absorbed by either the market or the curatorial world or the biennale world, and then it's shown. So you know what I mean? The moment in which you can be the crazy artist or very radical political artist or whatever artist making your work in your studio, and then this work being discovered and shown, this space, this time and space has shrunken because of these technologies. And that really signifies one of the most important developments of contemporary art is that it's like, in contemporary art, it becomes kind of like pop art, because pop art, the POP is actually that. It means it instantly an artistic work becomes culture because millions of people subscribe to it or love that song and take it on, right? So yeah, in a way, you can also look at pop culture also as a cybernetic phenomena, and also look at how contemporary art's development sort of like parallels or compares to the sort of like pop culture in a way that we can only talk about it in terms of like the sort of like the Elvis and the Beatles and on, right? That type of pop culture, you know what I mean? Like Hollywood, television, like 50s, 60s, 50s, 60s non-pop culture. Yeah. So I think pop culture is ahead of contemporary art in understanding this, like how technology shrinks the space between what constitutes as art as something that is new and it's not culture yet, and then something that becomes culture later through its recognition and understanding and affirmation by the political world, the cultural world, the institutions, and all that.
I think I want to say though that something that you're saying is actually really reminding me of when you're talking about how art rejects
the dominant culture.
The dominant culture, and then it stands up to it, and then when art is then produced and circulated within networks of contemporary practice, and critics and historians begin to write about it in the magazines, and scholars also begin to value it, then it returns back to the culture.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about this kind of circular sort of movement that actually echoes an earlier point that Ming made about the kind of movement that goes on between sort of within the open call itself, so you have an open call, and then that can be anywhere, and then you submit work online, and then you sort of get involved, you start communicating, you share your work, then you get on a plane, go there, you set up with a local institution, and then at some point you do work with the local community, and then that work gets put on their website, and then it gets circulated again from that location, and then again it becomes global again. So you kind of, the open call functions as this sort of, there's this kind of bookend to your becoming part of a kind of, yes, Halima, but one second, as you're becoming a part of a more global network of contemporary art and contemporary practice. Halima, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. This is actually endlessly fascinating. I'm a little unclear about something. I think I've always, at least from my perspective, understood art as already being part of the culture. So I'm questioning this proposition that art goes through this process of becoming culture, whereas I think it's the recognition changes it into something else that maybe necessarily isn't culture as we understand it, I would think. Because I think once it's kind of acknowledged in the efflux announcement and goes through that process of institutionalization, it maybe actually feeds into a completely different machine that relates a little bit closer to the processes that are included or embedded in late capitalism, actually. So I'm just wondering now that I think maybe the distinction that we're trying to make here is occluding me in a particular way, I suppose, because like I said, I mean, just with my own practice and also from the networks that I've been a part of, the art, so to speak, that's being created in those networks is actually embedded in the culture that surrounds it and is fed by that culture, so to speak. So there almost sometimes is a distinction between.
This is why I put the warning that like this is an avant-garde position, right? It's sort of like it has residues of an avant-garde understanding of art, but also it depends on where you come from. Of course, the opinion that you have here echoes the very important political point made by cultural studies people from the late 80s, that basically this distinction has to be taken off. There's no high culture, low culture. There's no art and culture. It's all culture. And of course, we can reconfigure it to look at it this way. But I think for the sake of our own argument, I think it's important to recognize that at least from the late 19th century up until very recently, this distinction was maintained between what was art, or at the forefront of artistic practice, new forms, new meanings being produced by artists in the studio, and what was being accepted and shown in a museum and accepted as culture. I mean, we had these type of arguments. I mean, we still have them. When a certain work of art is shown and protested by the conservative members of the society, like say a good example of it is like in early 70s, a museum director in Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver Art Gallery, he already was in love with minimalism, and the minute he became the head of the museum, he started bringing all these minimalists from New York. Like he gave a solo show to Dan Flavin, he gave a solo show to, and stopped purchasing them, and there was an uproar. There was an uproar in the city. What are you doing? These things are not art. We want to see abstract paintings, because the abstract painting was already accepted. They wanted to see more Van Gogh, more Gauguin, and maybe more Jackson Pollock, but they were not ready for Donald Judd's boxes because they thought this is something my grandmother can make. And there were like protests, or like when Canada Council, when a National Gallery bought a Barton Newman in the 1990s, it was still the same thing, and this was even an abstract thing. Like right-wing newspaper wrote that this is not art. Why are we buying this? This is crazy. We should put the money towards more historical works of art, right? So I'm only making this distinction because it helps us understand how these networks, what these networks do. But of course, we can look at it how you said it, where like it's already culture, and then it becomes a different kind of culture, or like it enters a different realm once these institutions take it on, or like once efflux sends it off, or something like that, you know?
I have a thanks, Mo, but I have a different sort of response to Halima, and I would actually want to hear your response and Ming's response, but please, anybody else jump in if possible. Yeah, my response has to do with the open call, and I think the open call has a very specific function, you know? So the open call doesn't assume anything other than itself necessarily and what it promises, right? But we understand that it's bookending a series of processes within a network, and the residue of that network is becoming global, right? And so the open call has a very, very sort of like functional process and functional sort of like apparatus that I think if you think of it, you know, if you go back to pre-mailing list, and if you go back to, and I'm talking about digital email mailing list, if you go back to pre-mobile phone, this would be the equivalent of, the open call would be the equivalent of a collector. Maybe not a collector, but I think it could be something in a magazine, or it could be something that was in the realm of something like the Venice Biennial, a kind of large-scale exhibition that
people know that there's a section of Venice Biennale that is open call, right? Is everybody aware of that? It's called New Visions or something, right? Where like you can apply, and it's not the curated show, it's not the pavilion show, and it's another show that is for emerging artists, and you can apply. It's an open call, and then you can apply, and you might end up in this show that is on the third most important thing that happens in Venice whenever the show is on. And it's actually totally, they still try to keep the spirit of open call as part of the big show.
I think it's interesting that open call is understood to be a democratic gesture within, you know, a communication framework. But open call, I don't think started out as a democratic gesture. You know, like if you're looking at open call, if you're looking at open call, Jeremiah is asking what is it called again? The part, the exhibition.
Which one? It's called New Visions, I think. New Visions.
Okay, thanks.
The open call wasn't always a democratic gesture. I mean, now it's understood to be an open call. But if you think of like, okay, let's talk about the transition from technology to open technology. Technology was not always open. You know, like I'm trained as a software engineer. I understand that the beginnings of computer programming were not democratic. They were not. They were really highly specialized technicians.
And secretive material, because competition was high between companies and governments.
Precisely. And I think that that is where the open call truly where we can understand how the open call is attached to specific, say, institutional, but I would think more global, international, national networks, because
well, let me give you an example. Maybe this helps. In Canada, when they started the infrastructure for art funding, which was like late 60s, because the agency was new, Canada Council for the Arts, right? And they thought people don't even know, but also because there were so few artists, they would put open call for funding. They would like advertise open calls, and actually there was more funding there than number of people who applied. So everyone who applied for funding would actually get funded, because it was like the agency was desperate to give this away because they hadn't established the proper networks yet to do it, right?
For artists to become, you know, or for work to be shared in a public space. But I'm also, that is correct. That's totally correct. That's totally an interesting and a perfect example. But I think when you mentioned the kind of Venice Biennial and its open call, I'm like, oh, right. But people applied, you know, people were invited to join. Like your country applied to be part of the Venice Biennial, Venice International Exhibition. There's an echo.
I'm gonna turn my mic off.
Hello. So your country basically applied to be part of the Venice International Exhibition. And why did your country apply to be part of the international exhibition is because at that time, Venice and in Italy, you know, sent out a call. It probably was an open call. They sent out an open call to various, you know, countries and various sort of like museums around the world. The way it functioned at that time, I think possibly, and now I'm talking about the beginning of contemporary art, somewhere in the 50s and the 60s. You know, you have countries like Brazil participating in the Venice Biennial. You have countries like, I think, Argentina as well, Mexico, the United States. You have countries, you know, Japan. And how did they participate in Venice? Of course, was through their museums. So you have a national museum in the United States. Well, not only a national, but you have several different museums in the United States. In Mexico, you have different museums. In Brazil, you have different museums. And so the open call specified, you know, a museum of a national scale, and the curator, you know, from that museum, or one museum would be selected to curate the pavilion. I mean, that is still the tradition at Venice up to today. You know, except a few countries that don't conform to the museum idea. But I think, you know, I want to go back to Halima's point, because I think, Halima, what you're saying, that culture is already culture in a way, because we're sort of, I feel like what you're saying is also it's interesting to say that culture recognizes itself as culture, does not go through process of recognition, and perhaps what we're describing is a process embedded in capitalism. But I wouldn't say that's the same for the museum in you know, the museum process. So how, you know, museums are curating pavilions in Venice, you know, in the international exhibition. At a national level, you have countries reaching out to other countries to request for a museum and a museum director who is going to select an artist or a curator or an exhibition to take to Venice to represent that country. And so I think that framework is not so much related to, I mean, it is and it isn't so much related to, I think, the idea that it has to be recognized first. But I think it really is related to the idea that open calls want perhaps the most democratic things, and especially at the national level, when, you know, councils for art and governments were sending out calls to different museums and different artists and etc. I mean, it was of course a very small pool, you know, compared to the open call that we have now that reaches everyone, supposedly. And we think it reaches everyone, basically. This is also what we still assume about the open call, is that it's fully democratic, it reaches everyone, you know. But I don't think that is the case at all. Sorry, Jessica,
Jessica, go ahead. Thank you. I would just like to ask a question and also make a comment, because for me it's still not so clear what's the unique position of the field of art within this whole mesh of the network and the mailing list. Like, for instance, if you look at the history of the electronic mailing list, like in the 90s, there were like mailing lists around everything with the rise of the World Wide Web. You had like journalists, you had, of course, computer scientists, you had people from different spheres of knowledge, but also like before the World Wide Web, electronic mailing lists were very much common in academic institutions. So it was, in a way, the mailing list, rather than being this place of huge outreach, it came also out of certain specialized circles where like people after a course would be, in a way, involved in a mailing list. So I'm interested in a way, thinking about these things outside of the field of art. And also, I think if we think of like what you were saying around eFlux, where the focus becomes very much as if like the exhibition equally as if happens in the exhibition space, but also online. I think this, in a way, this phenomena of like, as if of like being able to, it's like some sort of mediatic speech act where things as if happen when they are circulated through media. I feel it's in a way very common to also other other fields and that have different spheres of value. Like for instance, in research institutes and academic institutes where, like, let's say in research institutes that are working on, I'll just give an example, working on solving, like, let's say, dealing with a housing crisis. Sometimes actually, like a housing crisis, I'm just giving this example because it's very tangible. It deals with the place where you live. But in a way, sometimes because of how things are divided, like within the distribution of labor and also like the different hierarchies within work and the economy of work that in a way brings people in a way that facilitates a big, like huge aspects of life within capitalism. Sometimes in a way publishing a report or putting something outside, I'm giving like this terrible example, becomes as if very much equal to dealing with the issue at hand. So I feel this whole prioritization of, and like as if instant gratification where like something happens as if equally, I don't think it's equally, but it's in like similar maybe degrees on the ground, but also in media, it's common all over. And also, like, I'm thinking more of about the history of the network and in a way that's like in recent, like since the 60s, more of, there's been like in the last also 15 years, a lot of different theories in different fields that focus on the network and that have gained a lot of traction in the last few years, like the actor network, like ANT, like also now we have neural networks like machine learning that were previously called artificial neural systems. You know, so you have, there's for instance the Institute of Network Studies. I sent now an essay that I find really, that I've personally learned a lot from, called The Principles of Networking, written by the founder of the Institute of Network Cultures in 2004, Geert Lovink.
Sorry, where did you send it? Because I want to make sure that everybody receives it.
I've sent it in the conversation while we were talking. It's on the network. I could send it again. Anyhow.
Oh, yeah, so, the Drive Google one that you sent?
I sent.
Yes, I see it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the link.
Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, I'm really interested in thinking of why did the network, the interest of the network emerged in the last 50 years, I would say. Because then I was once looking into, I was once like trying to research the history of decentralization as in a way a model that is in by itself, the way it's been advocated a lot in the last few years within technological spheres.
Yeah, through blockchain or not.
Yeah, that it is subversive, you know, and it's democratic and stuff. And then I remembered something that I had, like a graph I had stumbled upon before, and then I researched its context, which is, it's a report written by Paul Baran, who was like an advisor working with Rand Institute, which is one of the biggest military research institutes in the US. And in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was basically he was like one of the many researchers and also research projects that were commissioned at that time to search for like communication systems that are very pervasive and that are spread, that in case there's a nuclear crisis somewhere in the world, the different military agencies could communicate. Which is like the internet is also like the ARPANET is one of the things that are born out of that. I can share with you, I could look for because I've seen the whole report online, so I can share with you the link. Yeah.
The history of internet begins with this RAND Corporation.
The distributed network systems.
Yeah,
So basically,
it's embedded in our history.
Yeah, and there's also another thing which I think really interesting for this conversation. It's an essay by Orit Halpern on how in the 60s also the like in urbanism, the city, the 60s remodernization of different like urban fabrics around the world, but mainly in the global north. In a way, how the city was also after, in the end of the 60s and 70s, referred to as like this network, where you also had these like mind over body allegories in a way reproduced. It's in the nervous system catalog. and that the exhibition that Anselm Franke and Tactical Tech created at the HKV like 2-3 years ago. But it's really interesting because it falls into these things. Anyhow, so my question here is that it comes from this observation. So in that report, Paul Baran talks about 3 kinds of networks: centralized networks, decentralized networks, and distributed networks. And I feel in a way we're still we're at a time where so the way he theorizes it is that distributed networks is based on 2 things: digital communication, mainly radar, and redundancy. So I feel in a way somehow because of the network society that we live in, we're like there's a huge crisis of the imagination where you often find many people thinking that, like people from different fields thinking that what we're doing is particular to their own practice. Well, in a way, I feel as if there's a certain redundancy that's happening because of a certain crisis of the imagination. So I don't, maybe I'm missing something. Like I would love to understand more by how, in a way, the art world uniquely evolved from like mailing lists, or also like the whole network within artists are in. Also because I feel personally, I think it's super problematic, like as an artist to be, for instance, seen as an ambassador of a certain nation state or the place that I come from. Because like one of the reasons why, for instance, I'm just going to talk from my personal experience, where I explore and investigate the things that I look at and work at, is because I do not want to be confined within this like places of delineation. And I feel inherently like within the practice of art, there is this desire to go outside of the discipline, outside of the stated boundary. So I'm just leaving these comments and would love to hear more this unique role of art within that.
Moses, you gonna talk, or should we just let other people talk? Let's see if somebody else wants to participate in the discussion before we sort of like talk again. There's also like Moses, your microphone is muted. Go ahead, yours.
Jessica written down your question, so we can return to it definitely. But if somebody else wants to contribute to the debate, which is a very hot debate, please go ahead.
For me, it's like I can totally like sympathize with Jessica, right? Because I became interested in history of cybernetics and a lot of these questions way back, and not even in relation to art, just on its own, because I was kind of interested in computers and programming and technology since I was a kid. And but there is a way to understand why not like art is unique, because I've been saying the stuff that Jessica is resonating in the class to a lot of people in the past few years, as someone who sort of like studied this history long before it was fashionable in the art world. But there is a uniqueness, because if we see how the trajectory of the development of sort of like curated exhibitions, whether they were like large curated exhibitions or like any kind of like exhibition, not even curated exhibitions, but it's a tension between sort of like the uniqueness of the work and how like you're just exposing something and nobody knows, and all the tradition in the curatorial work to keep your work to yourself, not talk about it to anybody, not promote it, not talk about the artists you want to show, and artists not wanting to show or expose what they're doing. And then the fact that versus the ability of communication networks and communication technologies to spread everything, to pass it on as wide as possible, right? And then also that basically this tension is mirrored in the sort of dichotomy between artwork as a unique work of art, as a unique and authentic piece of human creation that deserves like protection and all that, which basically is like it happens in a, what do you call it, like scarcity economy, versus internet that basically promotes and proliferates. It's sort of like post-scarcity type of thing that like you just write and produce and put out there and in the hope that you put 1 million messages in a bottle and you throw it in the ocean and you hope that one of them will hit the right person, right? A complete different approach, right? And when you put these two together, of course, there's a kind of tension that does not exist in other fields and their history of their relation with technology, because they did not begin with like this unique worshipable object, deserve to be protected and kept as a secret and all that, you know. That's the kind of thing that makes it sort of like a little bit unique in the art world when you're talking about the relationship between the development of contemporary art and the development of high technology or like communication technologies. To me, that's what made it interesting, this tension, because part of art wants to be unique and special, but then these networks and these processes makes everything kind of like flat and generic.
I would just say that in comparison with other networks and with comparison with other networks outside of those used or the networks within contemporary art, or the networks or contemporary art, networks of contemporary art, you have a kind of a process where there is a selection, some kind of selection, not a natural selection like, you know, evolution, but a selection that's really and on purpose, you know. So in the case in which artists become some kind of representatives, you know, you have a process of selection. And even in the case of the open call, you have a process of selection. In the case of development, and from what I understand, the kind of developmental economic field, you have various processes of selection that take place, you know, that have a very high impact on then what we understand to be unique or what we understand to be special, or and also makes us ask those questions. Why is such and such a thing being given precedence over other things which already are existing and already have a network? And I think the answer is, I think, if you look at, you know, a very easy example after the financial crisis in 2008, art again, you know, became something of selection. And the reason why in relation to the economy is because people who, you know, were thinking of ways of investing in a sustainable manner thought that art was something that you can actually definitely invest in, and whose value, art is something that possesses a value that accrues, you know, at a level that was higher than perhaps other, you know, things. So you have people who were kind of jumped in after 2008, and you have galleries that were more or less global corporations. You know, you have, you used to have Gagosian before 2008, but then you have things like the White Cube, and you have things like David's Warner, which function more or less like corporations, you know. So I don't know necessarily if there is an answer to how different is the network of art from the network of already existing networks, but I have an answer that I think I can definitely argue that the processes of selection in relation to either frameworks in economic frameworks, of development frameworks, or even frameworks that have to do with nationalism, or frameworks that have to do with government, give precedence to art. I don't know why that is the case, but they do. And so I just want to also repeat this idea that the open call is not something that does not come with selection. You know, we look at the open call as something that is extremely democratic, but then behind the open call, you have something that is full of implementing processes of selection.
Now, two things that I want to add to what you said is, one more reason why this is like unique. The case of the contemporary art world is unique, is that even though we see at least blue chip artists as investment, right? But art is a type of commodity that at the same time that it's traded, that it's traded just like all other commodities, but at the same time, it is the most difficult commodity to actually set a definite or fixed price on. So it has this function as any other kind of commodity, but its value, which is different than price, its value and price are in such fluctuation that sets it apart from all other commodities. So even at the blue chip level, now if you come down from the blue chip level to like more sort of like levels in which we breathe in this ecosystem, it even becomes more volatile and more sort of like hard to evaluate and price it. Yet it is still economy. It is still very much, as you said, like any other kind of field, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is just a footnote to Moses's 2008 investment stuff. It's like basically art market didn't go down because what happened was both George Bush and Obama gave money to rich people. The economic recovery package was given to rich people, and what happened was it bounced back the stock market and real estate and sustained the art market, basically, because that's where the territories or areas in which the investor class was comfortable putting their money in. They were not interested in expanding production or opening new factories or providing any other kind of service that to them looked like just like a waste of money in a time of economic disaster. And that's why these politicians should have actually put the money themselves into infrastructure building, whether it was building museums and community centers, or it was light train, or fixing dams, or fixing stuff. They didn't do that. Both George Bush, a Republican, and Obama, a Democrat, they both decided to pass the recovery package to the very top echelons of the hierarchy of the economy, and those people basically put it in real estate, art, and stock market, and these things are their sphere, right? So that's why we ended up with the contemporary artwork did not really experience the crash as bad as other worlds. I think we lost Moses, right? Yeah, Moses is frozen. You guys can hear me, right? Yes. Yeah, so we wait for Moses to come back. It's totally fine. He already had a little bit of a problem. I hope that I can also contact him on another media and see what happened to him. But you know, it's about 6:12, and I'm gonna utilize the time left over to basically talk about. So we talked about a project. Oh my God, the word project again. We talked about a project for the theory seminar, and for those of you who are not there and you can still participate in it, the theory seminar, we're trying to like write a collective piece of text together. And for this seminar, we want to propose, and I've spoken about it with Moses, we want to propose doing a project somehow that resembles, you know, like I dislike the word exhibition online because it just doesn't mean anything. I think let's see. No, Moses is not back. But some sort of interaction between what you as artists are researching for or around your Digital Earth proposal or project, somehow sharing materials that you're collecting, but mostly visual material, and somehow producing a programming or algorithm with the help of a programmer who's already like on team with us here at the New Center to somehow visualize or display them in a form that resembles some kind of something that can be considered the next best thing to an exhibition online or some experiencing of a collective art project online, right? And we're in class for 8 weeks. So we have basically 8 weeks to at least, if not launch the project at the end of the 8-week sessions, but at least be done with so much of the work that then this could actually be launched not that far, maybe in early January 2019. also, because most of you are in that seminar, there's a way to combine the two and sort of like from the beginning start thinking about like the collective text writing and this sharing of like your image archive of your own images or images you've been collecting or images that you will collect all together in a single project. We can also do that, but we don't have a lot of time to think about this. I think by next week we should have a clearer idea of like what we're doing, at least a framework for this one or two projects, depending on how you guys feel. And then as the classes go by, as the seminar sessions happens, through email and classroom, we can do a lot of that work that does not interfere with the guest lecturer that will be coming in, and basically they have not much to do with this project. It's mostly me and Patrick for the writing and me and Moses for the second one, who will basically be taking care of these two or single project. If it ends up, based on your choice, if it ends up being a single project, then it'll be me, Patrick, and Moses working together on them all. More me and Patrick more on the text side, and me and Moses on the image side, but the end result will be one or two completely separate projects. One is a writing project, a collective writing project, and then the other one will be that visual informational experience online that we will create. And there's Digital Earth people are also talking to this company that hosts these type of experiments. So there's a really good space for it already that's doing this type of like algorithmic projects online that can then maybe host our creation, whatever we decide to create together. So just like to think about that. Also, it would be good, like the other seminar, to have a respondent, like two presenters and two respondents for our next week's seminar, who's Marina Fokidis, the curator of the last Documenta, who will be with us. I already sent you the text by Marina, and she'll be here, and she will basically be doing most of the talking, rather than this week where me and Moses did a lot of the talking. We shared the podium. Yeah, so it would be great if I can get some names. Who would like to be presenting on Marina's work? There will be two people who are present and two people who respond. If you don't pick it up, I'll assign it, and it's just going to be up to me. So it's better if I'm like a good liberal parent. Like I try to be democratic. If it doesn't work, then it's going to be like, guys, it's Marina Fokidis. It's like, you want to talk to Marina. She's like a very important thinker, intellectual, and curator. So, okay, so I guess I have to handpick, right? And because I know who's presenting in the other class, those people will be a little bit busy. I would say, let's say, Amber, would you like to present on Marina? Yes? Yes. Okay, so we go for Amber. And then I would also think, Francois, what do you think? Is that okay? Basically, you will read Marina's text, and you will have something about 15 minutes of presentation on what Marina asked you to read. Can I guess I can count on Amber's okay, right? Amber will do Marina. I guess Francois is not around the computer right now. Okay. Oh yeah, okay, so all good. Okay, so Francois will do it, right? You will present 15 minutes on Marina's main text that provided us, right? Okay, so that's also good. And then we need two people who would do shorter, like 5-minute to 8-minute presentations on the responses to the presentation. So who would like to volunteer for that? I would say Jessica and Valia. Your work is less because you don't have to get deep into reading Marina's text. What you need to do is just have a good familiarity with the topic and develop spontaneous responses to the presentations made by your colleagues. So you're mostly responding to your colleagues. And then we circulate a group mail between all four of you in order to maybe talk to each other prior to the session if you need to. But even if that happens, you should be able to formulate a response on spot, because this is about this ability to think and articulate spontaneously. The responses are mostly about that. So yeah, so that would be good. I already got, like, if I can get the okay from Jessica and Valia, I'll be fine. It will be like a 5-minute presentation. Also, please, that means please don't miss the seminar next week because you're presenting or responding in it. Okay, Valia, what about you? What about you, Jessica? Is that okay? Lovely. Okay, so we decided on that. Every week we decide about presenters and the respondents of the following week. That will be something we do at the end as like a paperwork or just taking care of the business side of things. We still have 10 minutes. Moses, you were cut off. Do you want to like jump back in and finish what you were saying?
Sure. First of all, sorry.
That was great. I just got a chance to like go over like all the like paperwork. Yeah. So now we're back to theory. Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, I was sorry about my kind of mishap, my digital mishap, but yeah, I feel we have a very rich conversation that's going. One of the things that I was trying to sort of maybe think about that maybe did not get resolved in our conversation was specifically about the question of, you know, you are an artist in a specific context. There's an open call, and then you submit to this open call, and then your work is selected, and you fly and you go to that context or that place. You collaborate with a local organization, and then somehow that organization puts your work online, and then you circulate back into this kind of global context. Is the contribution that Ming made to the discussion? I find it very, very interesting, although I think that the categories may be perhaps not false, but maybe perhaps interesting to think about in lieu of other kinds of networks that exist. So what other economic networks function in that same way? You know, so you may also be just describing a supply chain, you know, or you may be describing how Hollywood movies produce, or you may be describing, you know, how, you know, Nollywood or Bollywood, or even how, you know, fishing companies operate, you know. So how do you think about other kind of economic sort of distribution systems, you know, and networks, and how do you bring that context, that their understanding of, you know, locale, location, and global, etc., into the conversation? Because I think one of the problems of contemporary art is that it's still, even though the networking is decentralized or distributed, it still remains kind of within the tight hold of a historical tradition of naming, and a historic tradition of how we understand, you know, contemporaneity, how we understand time, and this is largely, you know, European time. So I think, yeah, you know, art world networks has good mafias, but you know, so there is a mafia, but then the thing that mafia controls is time. Really, you know, and time and how we understand sort of time, etc., etc. So time being divided into local and global is also something that mafia is doing. But if you think of it as through, say, a supply chain, you know, coming from somewhere in Cape Town or somewhere off the coast of Gwangju or you know, Hong Kong or Taipei, you know, what happens to your understanding of these economic distribution systems in relation to, you know, the networks that we're used to in contemporary art? You know, how do we how then do we understand it differently? Because what the other thing that happens is, with specific to my research, one of the problems that happened in the 90s in London is that the people who knew most about African artists were collectors, and not the academy, not the anthropologists, not the scientists, not the art historians. It was the collectors. And so you have collectors who have created like a whole, like I said, they've created projects, they've created, various technological kind of infrastructure to access African artists. And so, those collectors were put in the position of being curators and art historians.
I just want to give one more historical example to this, because this is so true. In the context of Aboriginal art in Canada, collectors who were collecting Aboriginal art were way ahead of anthropological museums and art museums or curators in understanding and evaluating Aboriginal art, because they had this long interest that came back from European colonialism when they were like not even established as colonies to collect this stuff, and they knew it. So then curators and museums had to go to these people because they were the ones who actually held the data and knowledge and expertise to deal with this art that was very new for institutions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that for me, it was a really big eye-opener. When someone says that they're an art historian in the Western world, it means that they're the prime factor of somebody who defines what kind of practices artists have, what kind of practices artists are making. When someone says they're a curator of a museum, in the Western world, that's what it means, like that they define certain parameters and certain categories. But actually, when you think of what you're talking about, the expansion of time, literally, the expansion of time, the expansion of, airplane travel, the expansion of, digital technologies, the expansion of satellites and etc. You have a real expansion of time and expansion of networks that go beyond, what was traditionally understood as the art historian. And that person just doesn't, or go beyond the art historian, sorry, not what was, but the art historian and the curator. And what happens is that person is no longer, in some contexts, the prime, prime specialist, the prime specialist, even if they have years and years of PhD and other kinds of research behind them. So I would think that when we're thinking about, networking and networks and, relation to technology, we have to add that kind of economic bracket. And why do we add the economic bracket is because, institutions such as universities, I can list several other examples, but knowledge really has wrestled out of the hands of certain people, and we have to really credit or give credit where it is due. Sometimes we do have to think about practicalities. Where is technology most effective? And how has technology impacted not just artists, but like everyone, And then we start to sort of take root from there and sort of think about, the kind of practices that we have. So thank you very much. And Mo, I think is this the end of the class? It's 12:30.
Pretty much. We have still like maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes to be precisely like 2.5 hours. So if there's anyone wanting to ask a question or throw in a last comment, there's a little bit of time for that.
Yeah.
And if not, please ask me any questions you have. We talked a little bit about the final project. Maybe I should update Moses about that, even though you can rewind the video and watch it. I doubt you will do that. Where basically I spoke a little bit about that thing that you and me have spoken about, right? Like the ability to like bring in some of the visual research of the participants together in an algorithmic system and make something that resembles something online. But then I also offered an option to combine the writing project from the theory seminars and the art project of our seminar together. And I basically spoke that it's possible to bring it together. So then we end up with something that you, me, and Patrick will do, because me and Patrick will take care of the text side, and then you and me will take care of its image side, and then somehow they relate and come together. And basically we have 1 week to decide whether there will be 2 separate projects or 1, and then set some parameters. And then because you won't be here in other classes until the last one where we wrap things up, we will send you all the links, and you can totally like watch them in your free time if you want to like see how the conversation evolved with the 7 other people that I've invited to basically teach these seminars. But basically, yeah. So the project will mostly take place via email and on the Google Classroom, where we discuss the parameters of it and stuff, because there won't be much time in people's other people's lectures and presentations to do that, right? Yeah. So that's how we take care of the project that I'm hoping that we will end up doing for Digital Earth. They're very much looking forward to it, and they're willing to put some resources towards it because they want to showcase it on the website for funding for next year's, and you know what I mean, show it to the people that we actually, beside you guys doing in your individual projects, we collectively were able to produce something. So it'll be amazing. And you know, I'm not necessarily always for high tech. I'm always thinking of creating like something amazing with like the most basic way of incorporating programming or algorithms, or with basic ways of like using tools to do collective writing. So it doesn't have to be like super complex, because to go with the points that Moses brought up, I think it's very important to stay true to like dead technologies or like redundant technologies, and think about really easy ways in which, you know, it's like cooking something really tasty with like basic stuff, or like in a very small kitchen with like 3 pots, right? And try to force yourself to come up with something really amazing, you know, like that, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that sounds perfect. That sounds amazing.
Such a great group of people. It's just like such a lovely group of people from around the world that Digital Earth has brought together.
Yeah.
You know, I'm very excited about getting to know your works as someone who has an interest in curating, and see you develop your career. And also, like, it's a beginning of something for us working with Digital Earth. And also, Moses taught a very interesting seminar on African philosophy for us last semester. And as students of the New Center for Now, you guys will get 1 year of access to our archive. So if you feel like you can go back and watch, it's like 8 sessions of really incredible conversation between Moses and the seminar participants. No, it's really lovely. Especially one of our board members who actually like decided to attend the seminar like a student of Moses. They got into these unbelievable discussions about like alternative economies, about like ways to rewrite Marxism, like incredible. So feel free to browse those archive. All the archive back to 2014 is available to you as the Digital Earth participants for 1 full year. Most members pay $15 a month or something for that, but you guys get it as part of our collaboration with Digital Earth. So enjoy it while it lasts. Anyway, so I think Moses wants to go have a lunch? Yeah, right? It's lunchtime, right?
Yeah, it is lunchtime.
It's your dinner time. Okay, so I'm gonna end the broadcast. If you